We have a great lineup here for the generative AI and the enterprise panel. I'll let everyone introduce themselves real quick, but we have Casey from eBay, Mahak from Google, Michelle with AWS, and Vera with Salesforce. So maybe just do the quick, 30-second intro. Yeah, start with Casey there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Casey. I'm a senior technical product manager at eBay, focused on generative AI experiences. I've been working in product for about a decade, with the last probably 7, 8 years focused on AI specifically, and now obviously generative AI.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vera Vetter. I'm a director of AI product management at Salesforce. And here I manage a portfolio of AI products, of Gen AI products that harness the power of our LLMs, so large language models, as well as SLMs, small language models. Before Salesforce, I've been in various types of AI, edge AI on device machine learning, and before that, conversational AI building speech-enabled interfaces for robotics, connected cars, and smart home. I've been building AI products for the past 10, 11 years, so about the same time, and really excited about this time in history and this panel.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michelle Sohn. I'm the Generative AI Partner Solution Leader for Amazon Web Services, AWS. It's funny that Shirley was talking about the legal profession. I actually started my career as an attorney doing data privacy and cybersecurity law before moving over to the business and partnership side. In my current role, I get to wake up and work every day with our wonderful network of partners to work backwards from customer challenges, right? And build repeatable solutions using our generative AI capabilities. So super excited. Big thank you to Artie and the Reconify team for having me, and excited to learn from my peers and of course from you all today.
Thank you. My name is Mahak Sharma. I run the Google Product Partnerships and Growth team for Gemini, which was formerly Bard. I'm sure people have a lot of questions about that. I've been at Google for about 7.5 years, running multiple teams. Was working on Assistant before this, so the precursor to Gemini, and then started and grew the food ordering and the grocery vertical on search. My career has mostly been across product and product partnerships. So in the current role, our team was responsible for kind of three things. Number one, like from day one when we actually launched Bard and Gemini, thinking through the ecosystem strategy, the legal challenges that Shirley alluded to as well. How do we balance search versus Gemini, things like that. The second big area is around data and content. So how do we bring in the right type of data and content to build all these products across Google? And third is, across partnerships and tools and solutions that we bring within Gemini. So with whether it's Gems, which is our agents, and then or like plugins or any new solutions that we bring in. So our team is responsible for launching and bringing the partner ecosystem across for all of those products. So very excited to be here. Thank you, Artie, for having me. Still catching my breath from trying to find this venue, but I'm here. so I made it. I'm glad I'm here. Excited to get started.
They might have pedicabs. They start running along the Embarcadero. Or I can let you borrow this. Thanks everyone for being part of this. Maybe just to get started, going off a little bit of the stuff that Shirley was talking about, why are enterprises implementing Gen AI? Like, what are some of the goals? And perhaps just start with Casey while you're right here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a lot of like my experience, what I've seen, I think a lot of enterprises see generative AI as this great opportunity to really provide more value to their customers. I think you see a lot of enterprises now viewing generative AI as a tool that can actually help them grow their revenue. I think a lot, like several years ago, I mean, already like when we were working in AI, a lot of the focus was on like customer service, like automating like your internal processes and kind of cutting back your operating costs, which would impact bottom line. But I think a lot of enterprises see generative AI as this amazing opportunity to actually provide value to your customers that you're not currently able to actually provide, even if you were to hire more resources. And by that, you can actually grow your business, grow your top line, acquire new customers, get more value from the customers, and improve your bottom line. So I think for me, I see that as enterprises being very, very interested in that aspect.
How about yourself, Vera? How about Salesforce? Is it to automate the Salesforce process?
So let me preface by saying that this is my opinions, not
Yeah.
represent and my employer. But I would definitely agree with Casey. I would add to that though that I see that as a twofold reasoning. One is unlocking the experiences, customer user experiences that were just either impossible or very almost impossible to achieve with tools before Gen AI. This is one part of it. The second part of it is FOMO, fear of missing out. And like, let's be honest, and I think that's something that Shirley was also alluding to. When it came to enterprise AI, most of the companies were very much behind, right? We as consumers got our hands on ChatGPT and we realized, wow, there's this whole world out there, right? And then the realization hit quite a few players in the field, enterprise as well as consumer companies, big and small, that if they do not, as they perceive it, if they do not jump on this train, they might become obsolete. Now, I'm not going to judge, right, on whether that was a right way to approach it, but I'm convinced that this FOMO played a tremendous role in this first wave of enterprise Gen AI applications.
Maybe just to add on that, what stage do you see, and this is good for Michelle, feel free to answer that question, but perhaps what stage do you see enterprises in the Gen AI journey right now?
Sure, absolutely. So let me just take a giant step back because I want to kind of build upon your point, Vera. When I think about, as a student of technology trends, when I think about generative AI in the marketplace and among enterprises, I actually think about, just bear with me here, the Gutenberg press. And why I think about the Gutenberg press is prior to the invention in the 15th century of the Gutenberg press, to actually get access to books, right, publish a book, it took a lot of manual and labor intensive efforts to do so. With the invention of the Gutenberg press, right, all of a sudden you had immense access to very, very powerful, I think books are the OG, right, knowledge distribution technology. You had access to books which fueled literacy rates, innovation, et cetera. Generative AI is very, very similar, right, in that you're unlocking and democratizing access to very, very powerful technologies to interact, collaborate, generate new ideas, right? Not only to technical users, but also non-technical users. And so I think this point is often perhaps overlooked in the hype. Because it's so easy to use and really anybody can use it, it's really a huge step forward in terms of access to knowledge and technology. So in terms of where we are today, I think really what we're seeing today at Amazon is 2023 was the year of experimentation, POCs. And in 2024, we're seeing customers finally cross the chasm into production. And there's actually a couple things you need to do, right, to actually enter production. Among various other things, there's 4 things you need to do. Number one, how am I going to integrate my data securely? That's something that you need to do in terms of the enterprise. Number 2 is in terms of all the updates to generative AI, how are you going to keep up to date with model updates? How are you going to evaluate when new models come out? You really need a strong network of partners and vendors to help you with that, as well as processes. Number 3 is simply you'll be surprised at how many organizations don't understand that if your data is not ready for generative AI, then your business is not ready for generative AI. And that, I think, comes from a McKinsey report. And so really having a data strategy, implementing that securely across different departmental silos are the main sort of things that our customers are actively thinking about as they cross the chasm into production.
How about yourself? Where are you seeing the folks in that journey, and what are some of the use cases in Gen AI that you're starting to see, either internal, external?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. When we were talking to a lot of our partners last year, it seemed like we would go in a room and the use of Gen AI was in some way mandated by some C-level team, right? It was just something they had to do. And no one really knew what they were trying to do. But it was just, and it's because like ultimately anyone can mandate the use of the technology, but you're relying on humans to actually use it. And it takes time for that curve to catch up. And so last year was when, everyone was trying to, do things. And I think the table stakes, to your point, was that let's do something, let's try what's happening, and let's try to see what the results are. And how do you balance this aspect of the value that you're bringing and the risk you're taking to bring that value to your customers, right? And bringing in some sort of systems to balance that. Now I think we're entering an era where we'll start seeing some uniqueness, right? Like we'll start seeing what is the unique differentiation and the unique value the large language model or a combination of multiple models brings to your customers or to your employees, right? So I think it kind of goes back to the age-old question from an enterprise perspective: is like, what is the business strategy that determines your AI strategy? And it's really important to anchor in that versus trying to use a bunch of large language models to do things. um, in terms of use cases, I think Shirley covered a pretty comprehensive overview. It's pretty known now, the type of use cases that we're seeing. There are obviously all types. If you look at ML, I'll leave ML out, but I'll just cover generative AI right now. But there's internal and then there's external. Internal, it's mostly a productivity revolution where we see the productivity of employees going up. Um, the GTM funnel particularly is getting impacted. So if you think about marketing, content, sales enablement, training your sales force, and having coaches or practicing things like that, and then also outreach, right? And the way it's possible is because there is a very easy way, not that easy, but there is a way now to put all of your unstructured and structured data in a place that can be accessible via our large language model. And so the employees can now ask anything, any questions about the product or about the enterprise data. So that's the internal aspect, which is definitely kind of leading in terms of the growth that we're seeing. And on the external side is when you put that large language model into your product stack and then you start selling it to your customers. And so that aspect, the most obvious one where we're seeing a lot of clear from a startup perspective, so many startups doing it, is customer success, right? So customer success has really been it's just a very obvious application. No one liked the previous chatbot. Now it's getting easier and better. That's on the enterprise side, at least. Obviously, there's marketing use cases that are pretty obvious. And, in the industry itself, I think if you look at the fundamental ability of, really doing anything with all the data that you have, you can retrieve it in multiple ways. You can ask it questions. There's going to be next level of building agents on top of it where they can start doing things with your data. So fundamentally, it's just that ability to build that platform. And then on top of it, you can have multiple layers. And the way to think about those layers is going to be complexity of tasks that you can build on top of it. And I mean, there's several challenges still. I mean, we'll probably talk about those and actually productionizing this to your customers. But that is the start of what we're seeing today.
You mentioned, starting from the C-suite. I was curious if in any cases where like individual teams starting to implement Gen AI, even like there's a case here. There's someone in the audience who knows about where enterprises using folks in the enterprise using, say, ChatGPT to generate code and getting into a bit of trouble with that. Do you see any of that? Teams taking their own initiative?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, teams are using it, but there's a difference between, I call those prosumers. These are basically expert users in an area that will always try new tools, test out new use cases. How much of that is converting into enterprises? I haven't seen a lot of that where, an individual user, I think what happened with Figma, for example, right? Like a bunch of users started using it and then it started becoming an enterprise tool. That's not, we haven't seen that, but definitely see a lot. I mean, I ask this question to every person in my team and my company, and who's using, Gemini, ChatGPT for what. And there's so many new tools. There's emails, calendars, content creation, tools across the entire stack of based on your job, and definitely coding. I have heard from like really good coders that they do not like to use good, coding Gen AI solutions because they still feel that there's a lot of catching up to do. So all of this technology is still not at expert level. It is, you can replace low to medium skill set sort of tasks and jobs, but anyone who's an excellent writer or an excellent coder or an excellent artist cannot be replaced. We're not there yet.
I would argue that hackathons have never been as much fun as they are these days. And I think you pointed it out that the uh, the penetration and the availability of these tools, such as ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic Clouds, has really lowered the entry bar, right? AI ML has traditionally been a very, I would say, elitist field. And I feel bad saying that as somebody, who's been a part of this domain. But if you think about how the companies have used to operate, if a team wanted to do something with AI ML, it was incredibly difficult for them to even get started, right? Unless you had a PhD or something, right, or a special link to that, I know, snotty data science team out there, it was incredibly difficult even to try things out. And I think the incredible achievement of these tools becoming more accessible is that folks got an opportunity to try. They got an opportunity to prototype, to play around, and at least go through this first mile of exploration on their own. Now, that's a tremendous advantage. Now, this also comes with a cost. And the cost I have in mind here is that while GenAI became so accessible to folks across teams, across functions, those folks do not necessarily always have experience in bringing those prototypes into production, right? So their experience is based on those, half a day hackathons, and they're like, wow, it's working. Let's ship it tomorrow, right? And I'm not even kidding. However, for perhaps anybody who has who has brought AI products into production, you folks know that there are so many more layers to it, right? Like you were discussing the whole pipeline that it takes to um, to maintain the versions of the model, right? To make sure that they are robust enough, making sure that any kind of regressions are accounted for. Also, of course, being very diligent about the security, ethics, legal, the list goes on aspects of it, right? And the the gap I'm seeing is that while the folks get really excited about the prototypes they get out of those hackathons and by playing around with those GenAI tools, they do not always realize what it takes to get from there to a robust product that would be enterprise ready.
That's actually a good segue to what I was going to ask next, because we talked a little bit about the data as well, like having all the data in place. So to get from those internal tools or production to production, what are some of the concerns enterprises are having with generative AI? And maybe I can start with Michelle for that. Yeah.
Sure. So I actually want to connect a couple different questions you asked to some of the fantastic answers we're hearing on stage. You asked a little bit about use cases and team composition, and then of course some of the hurdles in terms of data privacy and confidentiality. In terms of team composition, first of all, for use cases, an obvious use case is, as you guys can see, I cut my hair, and I could have used generative AI to depict a more accurate picture of me with my long hair. But that aside, in terms of team composition, actually one of our customers, Thomson Reuters, near and dear to my heart because I used to be an ex-lawyer, has done an internal as well as external application. So to the point on making it accessible, right, to technical and non-technical users, what they actually did is they built a safe playground for both non-technical and technical users to actually play around with the models using a chat interface, actually come up and prototype different solutions pretty safely so that no one's breaching any kind of data confidentiality protocol. On the external side, Thomson Reuters also released Checkpoint Edge, which is their generative AI tax research application. So a really, really nice use of one company, both looking internally, how can we collaborate and build teams, both on that technical and non-technical side, and also ship products that are ready to go. I think I'll pause there and let perhaps Casey talk a little bit about data privacy and confidentiality, or speak a little bit here too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I have noticed as well is that a lot of large enterprises are actually like hosting their own version of ChatGPT that anyone at the company can use. At eBay, there's like an internally hosted version of ChatGPT. I use it all the time to write like user stories and other things with PRDs, just things to help optimize my day. But I think there's like a few reasons that companies would want to actually host their own. One is they can like promote it to employees to use, but as well, the enterprise can ensure that they have like control over the data. Like for example, if I were to go and use ChatGPT 4 and I were to like want to create like user stories, now is typing in a PRD or like what I'm working on, I would essentially be putting like eBay's IP out there on OpenAI. And even then, like, so, and sometimes I get frustrated because eBay's ChatGPT uses ChatGPT 3.5 and I prefer GPT-4. And I can still use GPT-4, but I have to like turn off the history. And like every single time I send a message, I have to like acknowledge like I'm not going to send any like IP and also turn off the history. So I think there's also the benefit of companies getting ahead of that and hosting their own version of a tool like ChatGPT. You promote employees to use it, not just engineers for efficiency, but then you can also kind of get ahead of someone using ChatGPT 4 on their own outside of the computer, outside of the data storage that the company would have.
Are you seeing folks doing any sort of fine tuning around it? Not just hosting it themselves, but perhaps fine tuning any of the models for their businesses?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially from like an engineering or like a developer use case. I know at eBay, not so much for the version that like I would use. It's just kind of like the general, like ask questions, get things. But for like optimization, like what the engineers would use, like a lot of times I think there's a lot of enterprises. eBay does it. Like fine tuning it on like your own like coding and policies and procedures. So like the engineers are getting answers that's actually related to your technical architecture. So definitely from the writing code aspect for sure.
Fair enough. Yeah.
If I can also chime in on that, in from my experience, completely outsourcing the LLM part versus building in-house versus finding common like middle ground with fine-tuning, that is such a hotly debated space. And I feel like even within most of the large enterprise players, that is an ongoing debate. In my experience, it's not necessarily a one size fits all. So to give you an example, I've had experience building products and shipping products with all three of these modalities, so to speak, right? Uh, my current products actually rely on in-house models, right, that we built from scratch, and in some cases they are also tuned for specific domains. And I have to tell you, folks, it's not trivial, right? And as it was mentioned earlier, these sort of things require massive investments. That said, there are definitely business justifications to go that route. To give you a couple of examples, when you think of some very niche domain specific applications, the black box, out of the box approaches or models that are available on the market might simply not be doing a good enough job. The level of tolerance to that not good enough might be okay if it is a free solution, something that is not associated with your brand, something that is not associated with your company. Say, if the user is just, playing with that free version of the cloud, right, or ChatGPT, they're like, okay, let me just give it a try. Nevertheless, if they experience that level of robustness as a part of your enterprise product, they bought a license for, it might be a very different level of tolerance or intolerance in that case. So I definitely see value in the fine tuning or even building from the scratch approach for certain cases. But again, all of those approaches I think have their time under the sun and have the reasons for existence.
I was just going to chime in. I think one of the key problems with just using the standard models out of the box is that you don't really need that big models for every application, especially as you start going task specific. Um, So there's lots of options out there, but at the same time, inference is really expensive and is majority of cost. So I think like thinking about, obviously there's a lot of work that's happening to drive the cost down for it, but as you think about fine tuning or even pre-training, like make to her point, making that amount of investment should justify like the risk and the value, back to the original discussion. At anywhere there's a lot of sensitive data, regulatory concerns, right? So finance and health, if the financial industry works with a few startups that really specialize in, making sure that the data is clean and you have more control and you can pre-train and fine-tune on their data, and the hallucinations are as low as possible. So there's a lot of mechanisms that you would have to put in place. It really depends on the sector and the use cases that you would have to ultimately solve for. But there's still a lot of, I mean, just to give you an example, every time we think we'll launch a Gemini feature, it almost takes us 5 to 6 times more time to actually make sure that the quality is there, right? So initially, if we estimate it's going to be launching in 3 weeks, it could take months to take the quality at the level where we think it's safe. So if we now transfer that to our customers, it's going to be even more because there's lack of talent, there's lack of benchmarks. So all of that gets longer and harder as you go downstream.
We talked a little bit about some of the factors around the data privacy and the privacy, security, and cost. But what about the accuracy? One of my friends' go-to prompts is to always write in spell lollipop backwards. And it's kind of funny if you try this. If you say spell lollipop backwards, most of the models get it wrong, and some of them end up getting really funny responses. There's one that would say to spell lollipop backwards, it's X, and it was a gibberish word, and then it went through the steps. First you do this, then you do this, and it still got it wrong a second time. So how does accuracy play into this, and what are some of the things? I mean, you can start with Mahak in this. Like, what are enterprises doing to help ensure, like, reduce hallucinations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the techniques which is pretty standard is grounding and RAG, right? So you essentially you have the model that you pre-train on, which is a bunch of data. The model can pick the wrong data for a question. So what you want to make sure, especially for factual questions. So one of the, just for example, enterprise search is a very important use case that is being solved through GenAI and through LLMs. So you can imagine if you're asking a factual question about, can you smoke when you're pregnant? I saw this example a few days back, and the model is just picking a specific publication from a country that is okay with that. It'll just quote that answer. And what you want to do is you want to ground on that specific data from that specific country because it is very people specific. It's depending on the culture and the context. And so you're trying to make the responses context aware and factually correct. So at the time when you're responding, you build a system that fact checks your answer, and it's grounded against a database that has the right answer, which we think are authority on that particular topic. So the standard technique that is that's done to improve accuracy is that across the industry. However, it is a very manual thing, right? Like this is coming from the NLP days. If you think about assistant, that's what we did for everything. The better solution would be to have a very large context window where you can just put a lot of right context for every question, and the model is able to process all of that to get the right answer that's needed. And the future might be a balance of the two, but it's still context windows are expensive right now. They're not that high. There are very few models that offer it, but I think that is a problem that'll be solved. But right now I feel like a temporary solution just to have grounding and RAG based solutions to solve for that.
The only thing I'll add to that answer is on the process side, right? It's having a human in the loop never hurts. So having somebody with subject matter expertise, I personally don't think common sense will ever go out of style. So making sure that somebody has common sense while evaluating answers to make sure that they're getting the most out of it. But on the point about privacy and risks and ethics, a lot of this stuff can actually be hammered out in POCs and experimentation to kind of test sort of where the kinks are before kind of shipping it into a larger public environment. So those are the two top pieces of advice I would give.
I would add to that that accuracy or performance tends to be extremely application and industry specific. And I think, Mahak, that's something that you also alluded to. Uh, what I mean by that, let me just give you a simple example, folks. I was on a call with this customer in insurance space, right? And that was for a service-based use case. And what I learned from them is that every time their service agent gets on the call, they are required to pretty much take the pieces of their responses from a manual, right? That's a response manual. And that alone is not so uncommon in the service industry. Nevertheless, of course, insurance is a highly regulated space. You can compare it to financial industry, for example. Their manual is like 4 pages long, and their agents are not allowed to adapt a single word from those manuals. Of course, by adapting that, they might inadvertently, for example, introduce bias, right? For example, introduce different conditions for different demographics of the customers, things like that. So, what I wanted to illustrate with this example is that when we talk about accuracy and gauging accuracy for GenAI solutions in the enterprise space, one needs to be very aware of what good enough is. And for some spaces, and I think creative space is a good example, right? Um, eh, there might be more tolerance there, right? For example, the user might be more open to seeing 5, 10 drafts or something, right? Taking them as inspiration and perhaps generating their own version based on those drafts. Whereas in other industries and other applications, it's paramount to have a very accurate, very data driven, and very factual piece of information produced by GenAI. And I would, so one, just evaluating where on the range you are with your application and with your industry is the first step. And number two, and Michelle, I think that's something you mentioned, benchmarking, right? Understanding which metrics can really define what good is. And sometimes you'll have to create those metrics. Many of the metrics out there, like the Rouge scores and things like that, that are commonly used in NLP space, they don't really do a good enough job measuring that for the quality of generations from the customer user perspective. So you might have to even create your own metrics and be very determined to measure and iterate based on that.
Casey, what are you seeing? How folks are or enterprises are measuring success? Like, are there some of the metrics like Vera is talking about, or is it accuracy? Is it just jobs done? Like,
Yeah, I think one piece I just wanted to add that we haven't touched on, which is a kind of a different measurement, but another a really important piece of accuracy is especially from like a responsible AI standpoint, just kind of a different way to look at it. But I've spent a lot of time working with responsible AI teams, and they're really more so focused on, if a customer asks something that's like completely out of bounds, how do you handle it? How do you ensure that this generative AI like assistant or like whatever the tool is not, if a customer like swears at it, it's not like repeating that swear word, or also as a use case, like if I were to be building a generative AI tool for like a retail or e-commerce, would you want to even attempt to answer a question if the user is asking about like U.S. politics or history? Like you have to almost think as an enterprise, what's really like that reward from it? And to be honest with you, I would imagine most responsible AI teams at the enterprise level would view the risk much greater than the reward. So I think another way to really help like reduce hallucinations and kind of improve your accuracies to make sure that you're really only trying to send like user queries are kind of like within the bounds and the domains of what your generative AI tool is trying to solve. And you could easily do that by, just having like an intent classification layer and trying to like classify, like, is this even like within bounds of our domain? And if it's not, maybe you don't even send it to an LLM, and that would help save on your inference costs. And it would also help prevent the use case where you're providing a completely incorrect answer to a question that there's really no value in you answering anyway. This is a little more from like a responsible AI standpoint, but I think that's like another really important piece of the puzzle and another really important way of reducing hallucinations and improving accuracy.
yeah, it's a good idea as additional form of guardrails. Yeah. This has been great. I have one last question to ask folks, and then maybe we can open it up if anyone has a question or two. There's so much happening with Gen AI, and it seems like nearly every day there's a new model, or someone's added a new model. So I guess, what do you all see as coming next, or what would you like to see, or what do you see in the next few years? Maybe start with Casey.
Yeah, I think from the enterprise level, I see probably a lot more happening with like image and video. I think a lot of like what you're seeing now with the way enterprises are using generative AI large language models is still a lot more so like text based. I know like I've seen on like LinkedIn and on like Meta and stuff where they're starting to kind of like put like question prompts. And now like I see on like Facebook like pages I follow, like they'll have the question prompts if I want to like click it, and then I'm sure they just send it to their large language model answer. So it's still like very text-based. So I'd imagine that you're going to start to see enterprise really adopt and leverage like the image generation, the video generation, the image to text, video to text, a lot more of that.
How about yourself there?
I agree. Multimodal is becoming huge, not yet, but I think it is definitely one of the streams. I'll mention two things. One is agents, agentic systems. You might hear words such as LAMs, large action models. You might hear about the ecosystem of agents. The idea here is what they call an agent, essentially performing a task or a set of tasks on behalf of the user, essentially increasing the level of autonomy AI would have to achieve the user's jobs to be done, so to speak. So I think this is definitely a huge area of research right now. I would argue that it has not necessarily crossed into the product domain just yet. Nevertheless, in the next couple of years, I think that's where things are going. This is one thing. Another thing that we see very initial signs of, and again, like that's more of, academia space at this point, are the fundamentally new architectures. Because let's face it, like all these models, new releases we're seeing right now, all of that is transformer based, right? And while this technology has been a tremendous catalyst to Gen AI, right, and has been responsible essentially for this entire boom, at this point, it's about what, 5, 6 years old, more or less. And what folks in this domain are curious about is what is what is next, right? Because transformers, this family of models, also have their limitations, right, and trade-offs. And at this point, it's more of a neck-to-neck race. So the question is, when this next thing, this next architectural leap would come, would it completely turn the industry upside down, right? And would it introduce a whole new wave of AI and both in on the technical and product level?
Yeah.
All the good ones were taken. So I think long term, right, what we'll see is increasing applications and pre-processing on the edge, right? To your point about getting a little bit more cost efficient and doing that sort of thing. On a personal level, a couple of folks and I were talking before the panel began. Personally, I'm really, really curious to see um, increasing personalization just at a consumer level, having text written in your own voice, having your own image, and creating content, videos of you speaking. I think we'll increasingly see that at the consumer level, and I'm very, very excited and also somewhat terrified at what we'll be seeing in the next couple of years or couple months.
So I'm the last one. Have very little choices here. I will say agents is definitely something that's top of mind. The reason for that is because the interaction model right now with the large language model is not the way humans interact. Really, it's like a one-on-one, right? It needs to be multi-turn. It needs to be multi-step, and all of that hasn't really been done. And that is really the natural conversational interface that we should be targeting. So agents hopefully helps us get there. So that's number one. The second, I think one thing I always think about it is that we all talk about democratization of AI and all of this, but it's still there are lots of countries that don't have access to education, don't have access to healthcare, and the research is really just happening in the Bay Area. People are pouring billions of dollars to these companies who are making solutions for other companies that are raising billions of dollars. And I think there needs to be a lot more work that needs to be done to actually make this more globally accessible. Having tutors on the phone that are free for kids, or having free primary care that's an AI doctor of sorts. So that would be something I would love to see more of. And we haven't really seen a lot. I meet a lot of great nonprofits that are doing some work on data collection side that pay, people from all over the world to upload data. I think that's a really great application, great way to actually uplift, the global economies that need this. But yeah, I think I would like to see a little bit less concentration of the impact and the origin of all the capital here. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to do for supporting additional languages as well. I do these demo nights roughly every month, and we had two guys from Cambridge University. They built, you reminded me about the teaching a math tutor, and it was pretty cool because the person could write out the answer and just use the camera, and it would figure out try to help them solve it. So it would walk them through the steps. So it's pretty neat. This has been great. I just want to open up to see if anyone in the audience might have a question or two for the panel. Or the person in the light blue. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So as these models proliferate, yeah, I see that people's concern about data privacy is growing beyond the conventional norms. When people care about guarding and shielding their savoir-faire, their know-hows of their business. When it comes to enterprise, what's going to happen to, for instance, take healthcare? Who is going to own the healthcare knowledge? Is it going to be pharma? Is it going to be hospitals? Is it going to be doctors that get augmented? Could they walk away with that data and create their own business, run their own business? Likewise, this is applicable to any other business or enterprise. So there are two sides to this story, or perhaps more, but my question is on these two sides. Who is going to be the judge of who owns how much of this intelligence that is created? And when it comes to, let's say, these cloud services, AWS, Google, Azure, or whatnot, when you train your data on these services, who owns what? Is it going to be these cloud services, or is it going to be, I don't know, Bank of America or Stanford Medical Center? Thank you.
It's actually a good segue to the next talk. We have someone who's going to chat about the legal implications and who owns it. And I think it comes a lot down to the terms of service. If any of you want to chime in.
At AWS, our stance, right, for services like Amazon Bedrock is any data you use to train is your own. We don't feed it back to our third-party providers. We don't feed it back to Amazon Titan. So that's our particular stance and how we do business with our customers. In terms of your broader question about ownership of the content generated itself, right, I think I'm also eager to hear about from the next panel on legal implications.
Well, just want to thank everyone. This is really interesting. I appreciate all the panelists, and let's give them a round of applause.